Broadcasting live from the Subaru of Gwinnett studio inside the Sonesta Gwinnett Place Atlanta Hotel. It's time for Travel Safely with Bryan Mulligan. Travel Safely is presented by Applied Information, creator of the Travel Safely smartphone app.
This special edition of Travel Safely with Bryan Mulligan features an installment from a limited series called Coping with COVID. Hosted by Bryan Mulligan, the president of Applied Information, Coping with COVID shares the stories and successes of people and organizations during these unprecedented times of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Hello and welcome to Coping with COVID. I'm your host, Bryan Mulligan. On this program, we help tell the stories and share the successes of people and organizations as we all deal with this COVID-19 pandemic. Our focus is on keeping people safe and re-energizing the economy. Our guest today is Mark McGraw, president of Sales Engine. And Sales Engine is one of the Sandler Training organizations, which does professional training and development, and it's got connections all over the world. So welcome, Mark, to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's kick off with your company and how you guys are dealing with the pandemic. I know that traditionally you've had lots of people into your training facility. How are you dealing with all of that, and what changes have you guys made to keep your business going in all of this?
Sure. Well, if you think about a training organization, whether it's sales training or service training, however it might be, typically people come together physically into a room. Obviously, that can't happen. Fortunately for us, about 7 years ago, we had a need at the time where we had a bunch of salespeople across the country and we had to bring them together. So we started to evolve into doing things virtually, video conferencing many years ago. In hindsight, it looks like genius. Frankly, it was dumb luck.
Sometimes you're good, sometimes you're lucky.
So we were lucky in that case. And so for us, even pre-COVID, we were probably 60, 70% already virtual at that time. And so making the shift for us actually was a little bit easier. Some of our clients that weren't used to it had to get used to a little bit of a shift, but thankfully we were positioned nicely before.
So without telling us any secrets about
Sure.
the business, the whole business, have you found people cutting back on training or finding people wanting training in these new techniques? How do you see the landscape for your business?
Yeah, so fortunately for our business, we've had zero reduction.
Oh, wow.
So we're very, very pleased to be integral in a lot of our clients, and therefore, because of that, we've had zero reduction. The number of new things coming in hasn't been as brisk as it was in the first quarter, but certainly things have held up really pretty well all in all. But there is a shift in terms of how people sell and what they need when they sell. Big thing right now for sure is well, a lot of the stuff you're doing is how do we do a better job of doing virtual presentations, virtual meetings. That's the number one thing on people's minds in our world these days.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we stood up this show, is to be able to actually put, in the software business, it's called eating your own dog food.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing is standing up a studio here in the IATL, which you can see behind us, and saying, okay, well, this is how we're going to project ourselves into the market, because one of the things we figured out is we're all going to have to live with COVID for a substantial amount of time. It's not going to just blow over in the next couple of weeks and we're all going to get back to what it was before. So in your customer base, how, after the initial shock of it all, it hit us like an enormous shock. How's your customer base dealing with it, I suppose, in the various segments that you're in?
Well, I think you bring up something really interesting, and that's that there's been a transition. I think at one point people were like, okay, we just got to get through the next 30 days or 60 days, and then we're going to get, quote, back to normal. And one thing that I see big time right now is this mindset shift that not everybody's there yet, but people are beginning to realize that back to normal is not going to be back to normal. Because frankly, a lot of people have begun to recognize, and COVID's done a lot of bad things, there's no question about it, but it's progressed a lot of people's abilities to use technology and become more efficient, save money, be more productive. We've seen a lot of that over the last few months. And so a lot of people are looking at it saying, we're not going to go back. Right. Even when we can get on airplanes and all of that becomes very normal. And we're not going to go back because actually there's a better way.
Well, that's quite interesting, and you're an entrepreneur like I am, so that's business opportunity, and
It is.
And so you're seeing business opportunity to train folks in these new techniques and so forth.
Absolutely, and we certainly are spending time with folks in that endeavor and helping them think about things differently and better, no doubt.
All right. Are there any thoughts about when your customers think they're going to get back in the office? Has anybody got a rollout plan, or how's that looking?
We've heard from quite a few clients, and I've heard the same general theme. And what they've said is that we don't expect to be back on a plane this year. And our companies have told us that. I've heard that over and over from many clients. And there's two reasons. The company doesn't want the people on the plane, and the customers of that company have said, we don't want you here. We love you, but we're going to have to do things virtually or different ways. And frankly, it's working really well as people are learning how to do it, such that it's not as necessary.
And that's kind of a great point that you make here that we've seen is that not only with our sales and customer contact folks, but the customers have become accepting of the virtual technology. And that
isn't it great?
That's no way to put that back in the bottle.
That's right.
And so even when the fact that you got to get on an airplane flight to take somebody to lunch, maybe there's a new business in arranging Uber Eats to go and be delivered at his office, and you share lunch virtually. I mean, who knows how powerful this might be, and where it might end up.
And that's part of what we're seeing is that the level of efficiency that people are getting out of what they're doing right now has really gone through the roof. And that's part why I don't know that we're going to, in fact, I'm confident we're not going to go, quote, back to normal. Just for the fact that efficiency has improved so much and the ability for people to touch multiple people in the course of the day. One other thing that's happened without a doubt, which is really an interesting side benefit, is sales cycles, and that if you're not familiar with the term, it's the amount of time that usually it takes for a company or person to make a decision on something. They seem to be shortening. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that the people that make the decisions aren't on airplanes, they're not traveling around, they're not commuting back and forth, they're stationary. Therefore, we don't have to wait 3 weeks until these 4 people can get together in the same room. We can do that this afternoon virtually. And that's causing people to actually move faster and things to happen quicker, which is fantastic for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, potentially that this new way of working, the internet transformed our lives and smartphones and all kinds of ways. This is just the latest iteration. Everybody's got used to the idea of virtual meetings. And so once again, it can make business more efficient, not less efficient.
And we've leaped forward. I mean, think about how much we've gone forward just in 100 days.
Oh, and we see it as just a data point of one, that we would have a sales guy on a sales trip, and typically you could have, a meeting in the morning because that guy wanted to go to lunch, and then a meeting in the afternoon and that guy wanted to go to drinks with that person. And so, you saw 2 people in a day. Whereas now you can see 6 or 7 people or more in a day just by dropping in on their computer. So has Sandler itself looked at retooling some of your sales process, or you think your sales training fits really well into this new order of things?
I think the philosophies of what we do remain the same, because our philosophies are based upon human behavior and psychology, and by and large that hasn't changed in a few hundred years. I think the delivery mechanism changes, how we communicate. And frankly, I just recently wrote a blog on 10 ways doing things virtually is actually better than being together. I've started to call it being 2D versus 3D. And I see a lot of benefits for being 2D versus 3D, even beyond just the travel and the time. There are other benefits that you see as a result of that.
And the net result of making our businesses more effective gives an opportunity for entrepreneurs to progress their businesses. One of the things I'm going to talk about on the show is turning data into information. It's what we do at Applied Information, and there's so many there's a deluge of data coming at us. And so what I wanted to do is just share a topic that's not actually talked about very much, but it underpins this whole business of how serious is COVID. And, some people say, oh, well, it's just like the flu. And some people say, oh, well, you've got to factor in that there's less people traveling, so you're not going to have so many car accidents. And what this is a graph of a series of graphs on what's called excess deaths. And this sounds like a dreadful topic to talk about, and it is. But it's something that we've all got to realize, just the impact. And what these graphs are that you can see here is that, these are, and I'll pick Belgium over here, is the normal number of deaths that occurred. You can see that they're fewer in the summer and they're more in the winter. But you can see the huge impact of COVID as a once in a 100-year event of just how many people it's caused to die. And that's now just not even analyzing what's on the death certificates, but you can see that every country, now it's a bit later than Belgium, was the UK, but nonetheless an absolutely dramatic impact of COVID in terms of how many people died. You've got various countries that did things quite well. And so, for example, Iceland over here has got no excess deaths. So whatever they did, we can look at that and say, well, that's actually maybe, we don't have to analyze exactly why that happens, but that's a good thing to maybe follow. There's the Nordic countries, and while that's a good place to look for the comparisons, because you've got two adjacent countries. One's Norway, and the other one is Sweden. And they adopted very different approaches. Sweden adopted an approach of laissez-faire, let things be, we'll get herd immunity, various other theories, which the scientists and epidemiologists said, this is probably not a good idea. And now the data is in. So you get a country like Norway with no excess deaths. They've managed to keep the impact of COVID to be manageable. But if you look over here and you look at Sweden, down in the bottom left-hand corner, that's the number of excess deaths of an adjacent country which is normalized for cultural and other things that they've got in common. And so you can just see that we've got to be really, really careful. And now we see Arizona and Florida and Texas on exponential curves. And that's just going to be a challenge for us to figure out. But just a bit of a dive into the concept of excess deaths. And it's one of the graphs and one of the data points to follow to see just how effective the political process has been to try and mitigate some of these things. And once again, my standard pitch is just do the three things: wear a mask, wash your hands, socially distance. It's not that hard, and we'll beat this thing. Mark, I'd really like to thank you for joining me today and sharing your insights and so forth on coping with COVID. And so until next time, everybody, stay healthy, stay safe.